Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk with Tia and Jill and a very special guest.
Yeah,
Welcome.
thank you. Thank
Welcome,
you. Good to be here.
everyone. Yes, our special guest, Dr. Brendan Niemira.
Welcome.
Yes,
Welcome.
we are so happy to have you with us today.
We
Thank you.
are, and we're
It's
excited
really,
about this
thanks so
topic.
much. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's really great to be here.
Yes, yes. And we're excited about this topic because it when we do technical topics like this, it allows for us to connect what we do in our field, right? And cold plasma is something that is new and innovative, and we can't wait to hear more about it. I know our audience is excited to hear more about cold plasma.
Mhm.
And then even your journey around innovation and how this came to be. And you've been working on cold plasma for a while. So I'm looking forward to you sharing your journey with our audience and having this conversation, because many of us, right, are down that path of innovation, whether it's product innovation or something, a cool technology, or even just how do we be more innovative with our teams. I feel like this conversation is really going to resonate with people who are listening today. So I'm excited about it.
Good. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. It's a great technology. It's been kind of an interesting path from the early days to where we are now. Yeah.
Ooh. Well, and that's the part that I actually find really fascinating is like the resilience and the
Yeah.
persistence and the belief and like how that actually translates.
Stubbornness. You can call it stubbornness too.
Well, it's all in the framing and the word choice, sometimes depending on the day.
Yeah.
Um, but right, innovation comes from being really passionate about what you're doing and believing in what it can do and the work, and it's not always easy. And I think not only just innovation, but when we see something like a technology, but even innovation, of course, because we do leadership, but in how we lead
Yeah.
and the types of cultures that we want. And I think there's so many similarities, and so I'm excited to
Yeah.
talk about how when we see this applied in one area, how it really can apply some of these concepts into the other areas that we work and live in.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sometimes my folks here will sometimes make fun of me because one of the things that I like to say is that I've got this idea, right? And I've got this vision. Now I just have to change the world to match what's going on up here.
Right.
no
That's all
small
I have to
feat.
do.
Look at you.
No small feat, right?
Right.
But that's important. It's important for people to have that vision, and people who are very good at developing this vision and seeing that the world needs to change to support it, right?
Mhm.
Like that's like a futuristic leader, right? And we need those futuristic leaders because we know in order for us, I mean, we talk about it in terms of leadership and transforming how people lead in food. Well, the world has to be a little bit different in order for us to really be true to ourselves when we come to work, be able to lead to our own authentic selves. The world needs to shift a little bit to be able to support that. And
That's right.
so I think that's important, and I am in awe at people who can almost see the future and say, okay, how do we shift the world in order to embrace
Mhm.
what we know we need to embrace to move leadership forward, to move technology forward, to move the food industry forward.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. It
Yeah.
takes effort, but it's effort that is well rewarded
Yes.
when the world becomes a better place. More productive, fairer, more accessible. It rewards everything you pour into it.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Well, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. So if you're out there with us, whether it's live or even in a replay, as we get started, like show us an emoji, thumbs up, thumbs down, middle, like what do you know about cold plasma?
Yeah.
I'm curious, share a little bit with us, because as we go along, we love hearing your thoughts on it and questions that you have.
Mhm.
Drop them in the chat so that way we can thread them into our conversation today.
And if this is your first time joining us here on Real Talk, I'm Tia. This is Jill. And we are co founders of Catalyst. And at Catalyst, we really provide leadership in culture solutions. We focus on leadership skills, how to be better leaders within the food industry. A lot of people talk to us on, like, man, how do I do food safety culture? Or how do I develop people? that's where we play. We partner with organizations to help them build their culture strategy, to help move their culture forward, and to help develop the people that's driving and leading within culture. So that's why we're here. That's why we love having these conversations each Wednesday. And we are happy that you are here with us today.
Yes. Of course, we want to jump right in. So, Brendan, we're hoping you would even start off by sharing, like, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to where you're at today.
Sure, sure. So I'm a research microbiologist and a lead scientist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Research Service. And I work at our Eastern Regional Research Center, which is just outside of Philadelphia. And I've been working here for almost 25 years, probably 20 years of that working on cold plasma. Developing it as a non-thermal processing technology for mostly what I work on is fresh cut fruits and vegetables, but also for powders, flowable foods, low moisture foods, and food contact surfaces. Right. So from my background, I actually have a degree in plant pathology, and then did graduate work in plant pathology and in food microbiology, which then led to this job as a food microbiologist.
I love how everybody's pathway to food is different.
Yes.
From plant pathology into food.
That's right. Sometimes people ask me, "Oh, where did you get your food science degree, or what department?" I said, "Well, actually, it was in a department with botanists, so it's a little bit of a different thing." The old joke is that if there's a bacteria on an apple while it's on the tree, it's a plant pathology problem, but as soon as the apple falls down, then it's a food microbiology problem.
Right. So we're connected, right? There's a connected world there.
All connected.
Right.
So you've been working on cold plasma technology, like you said, for 20 of the 25 years you've been there. Can you explain a little bit about, like, what is cold plasma technology and what sort of sparked this idea to apply it to food safety?
Sure. So for folks that are familiar with cold plasma, they're gonna understand why it's so exciting and why it attracts the interest that it does. And for those that don't know about cold plasma, we'll kind of back up a little bit, start at the beginning. So most people are familiar with the three states of matter, right? There's solids, liquids, and gases. And those kind of represent energy levels in foods. So if you have solids, then all the molecules and atoms are kind of locked together and they're kind of stable. If you add energy to that solid and all the atoms and molecules start to move around, well, now you've got a liquid. Okay, well, if you keep adding energy to it and the individual atoms and molecules start to break free and they're free floating by themselves, now you've got a gas. Well, if you keep adding energy to it and break apart those atoms and molecules into individual ions or free electrons, now you've got a plasma. Right? So some forms of plasma that we're familiar with are candle flames or blowtorches or the sun. Okay, but these are pretty hot, and they're not really going to be suitable for treating lettuce and tomatoes and chicken breast and that sort of thing. So the trick of what we're doing with cold plasma is to use electrical discharges, high voltage electrical discharges, where the voltages are so high that they actually tear apart the air molecules. They break apart the oxygen and the nitrogen into oxygen singlets and free electrons, and then create this complex mixture of reactive chemical particles, reactive plasma species that we can then apply to foods so that we can kill bacteria and parasites and spores and fungi and viruses without damaging the food that they're on top of, right? And that's the whole goal of cold plasma, so that you can create this without using any chlorine compounds, without using any organic acids, and then when it's after it's done its reactivity, all those reactive species just come back together to form air, right? So the only inputs here are air and electricity, and maybe water, depending on the kind of plasma you're doing. So air, water, and electricity, but there's no other kinds of chemical sanitizers, there's no other kinds of processes, and there's no residues at the end. So it's a very clean and green kind of a technology to apply this, and it can be very effective against lots of different kinds of pathogens, lots of different kinds of plant pathogens, human pathogens, on different kinds of foods. So that's really what sort of sparked my interest in doing this. When I first started this, I had some conversations with some plasma physicists, and some electrical engineers, and they were using this for other things. They were using it to modify the polymer cross linkages in plastics. And I said, there could be an application there for lettuce. there could be an application there for eggs or for cantaloupe. In order to kill the salmonella or E. coli or Listeria that's on the surface of these without requiring the chlorine ions or organic acids that would be used in conventional sanitizers, right? So going from that first concept to initial development and then going forward, it was a bit of a challenge, but the first idea was there to say, well, what if we don't need chlorine, right? What if you're a food processor and you don't need to use chlorine? What if you get away from some of those things, use some of these other things that's just clean and green? That was really the spark that, no pun intended, that led this whole thing going forward.
That is so interesting.
It is. At first I'm like, it almost sounds too good to be true. Like, no chemicals, no chlorine. I'm anticipating that there have been some challenges as you have gone forward with this.
There have been along the way. When I first started to do this, I think there were 3 really big challenges initially. First was that nobody knew what the heck cold plasma was.
Right.
Second was that nobody thought it would work. And third was that nobody wanted to pay for the science. Right. And so these are kind of barriers to
big barriers.
Right. So I should mention, I said that I did botany as a graduate student. That's what my doctoral work was in. But I did I started life as a physics major. So I had a strong physics background. So I had a real clear understanding of how the plasma physics would work and how it would interact with what the food microbiologist might need as a sanitizing process. Right. So to address the first challenge, nobody knows what this is. If nobody understands what you're doing, then you have the responsibility to explain it better. And explain it not just in more technical detail, talking about, plasma field densities or oxygen singlet ion ratios or anything like that. You need to explain it in terms of what people will be able to see the value of it, will be able to understand it, right? So the basis of science communication really is communication. It's not just science talking. I can talk about technical stuff all the time, but that's not really communicating. Right. Communicating implies understanding on the part of the person that you're sharing this conversation with, and so you have a responsibility to find ways to make this accessible so that people understand what it is you're doing and why it's important and how it can be used to go forward. So part of the whole journey was to become a better communicator, to be a more effective science communicator, and that's tied to the people that I'm speaking with. You speak one way with other scientists, other subject matter experts. You speak a different way with your boss, your manager, with potential collaborators, with other people that might be using it, right? So that was the first hurdle. The second hurdle was overcoming some of the preconceptions about this, because once people understood basically what I wanted to do and the kind of equipment that I needed to have and all this sort of stuff, the response was sort of, so you're going to hit this tomato with a bolt of lightning? And that's going to look good at the end of it? I mean, come on. This doesn't make any sense. This is never going to work. This is crazy talk.
I feel like, don't you have any trust in me?
Yeah. And they say, well, Brennan, you're a nice guy, but this is lunacy. This is never going to work.
Right.
So how do you respond to that? Well, that required a leaning into the data. So I had to scour the literature, go into all the different journals that had published some of these articles, and there were not very many. There was many more papers that were looking at. I talked about plastics, repolymerization of plastics, about changing the surface energies of textiles and things in surface treatment. So there's some data out there. There was some papers, some data on using cold plasma as an antimicrobial process, which then could be applied for food. So I'm pulling all this data together and saying, look, I'm trying to build the case to say, look, this is actually something that can work. It has been shown in these other areas, shown in these other cases, and this is the kind of thing that can actually kill these pathogens on the food. And so when you have the data to say, yeah, it does kill the salmonella, it does kill E. coli, it does kill the Listeria, the norovirus, then you can make that case to say, yeah, this is the kind of thing that we can actually build on and develop more appropriately to apply for here. But then you were to the third part. And it's like, well, I need some money to do this, right? If you're going to change the world, if you're going to dig a hole, you need a shovel, right? I'm gonna if I'm going to make plasma machines, and I'm going to build these plasma emitters so I can treat the different kinds of food, seeds and nuts and oranges and lettuce and tomatoes and whatever, I needed to have some support to do this. And I would say that in the first couple of rounds of funding that we sought for, grant funding and other things, the first couple of rounds actually, we got some pretty similar responses. They said, this is too weird. This is too crazy. This is too fringe. The whole, I'm going to build a plasma emitter. Well, that really sounds like a Buck Rogers kind of Star Wars fantasy, right? That actually one of the literally it was so. This sounds like Buck Rogers. That's a direct quote from one of the responses for funding.
Wow.
So faced with that, so now I'm in a situation where, in order to get the funding necessary to do this equipment, to build the machines, and to go forward with the cold plasma research, I need to have the convincing data and generate this data so that I can really have this to make a more compelling case. But how do you generate that data if you don't have any equipment?
Right.
So the real kind of chicken and egg situation. So what we did is we leaned into the science. We went back to first principles, and we leaned into that innovation. We leaned into the creativity. We said, how do we generate these things using equipment that is driven by the clear scientific principles, but is not going to be reliant on spending the money that is sort of off the shelf things. So we said, well, what do we really need here? What we really need is high density, high voltage, large electrical discharges. And one way to make those is with spark plugs. I mean, every car that's on the road uses spark plugs. So we actually went to a junkyard and we found big old pickup trucks, big old V8 that uses big spark plugs. And we pulled the spark generator and the distributor caps from those. We brought them back to the lab and we rewired them and wired them in the house current so that we could create those plasma arcs inside our laboratory. Then to take that tight, hot, dense plasma and spread it out so that it undergoes adiabatic expansion, becomes a loose, cool, diffuse plasma in a corona discharge field. Well, to do that, you need what's called a dielectric material. That's a material that will allow the passage of electricity, but will kind of slow it down so that it forces electricity to spread out. Well, we didn't have the money to buy the tempered borosilicate glass plates that would allow us to do this. We couldn't afford Teflon, and we couldn't afford these other things. So we thought about it a little bit. And I started hunting around garage sales, actually. And I went to a garage sale local in my neighborhood, and I picked up a whole stack of old storm windows, thick glass storm windows, brought it back to the lab, cleaned it up, and then we cooked up a solution of borosilane and applied that to the solution to change the surface chemistry of the glass to give us the characteristics that we want. And after that, we had a nice, beautiful plasma field, right?
Yeah.
There were a couple of other things that we did along the way to build this up. Now, I will admit, there was a very strong Beverly Hillbillies vibe to the first prototypes that we built. I mean, they were not very pretty, okay? But because they were built on the clear scientific principles related to high voltage arc discharges and the plasma physics, we were able to make these work, and we were able to treat apples and lettuce and almonds and things. We were able to demonstrate E. coli, we could kill the salmonella, we could kill the listeria, and then we publish some papers. And so, we're doing real science. Okay, the equipment is ugly, but the science is beautiful.
Yes,
we got this data, and then we were able to go back and say, look, if we're able to do this with this janky stuff that we've got in our lab, just imagine what we could do if we got some proper funding and proper support.
Yeah.
And fortunately, that worked, and it led to some things. We got some more investment, we got some more support from various people, and it led it forward to be part of our full research project here at the USDA.
Yeah, that is amazing. It makes me think honestly about culture change. Like, you were at this spot where you knew this was going to work just because you understood the science, right? You understood how it works. And it seems like it will work in this application. But you had some pretty big barriers. And I think barriers that people deal with when they think about, like, even just culture change. Like, you had to change, right? You had to prove to people around you that this is worth the investment to move forward, even though you knew it was going to work.
And I will say that I sort of felt sometimes, I wonder if people are getting tired of me talking about this, because I had to have the same conversations over and over and over. I really had to stick to my guns. And sometimes it was in the face of not just preconceptions, but it was like, sometimes I remember one conversation. Somebody said, oh, Westinghouse tried this back in the 50s and it didn't work. So, this is a waste of time. And I thought, well, electronics have come a long way since the 1950s, right? Since the old, vacuum tube days. I think we can do better. I really think we could do better back then. But that was the kind of cemented idea of, what is possible. All right. And I will acknowledge that maybe this wasn't possible 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but I believe that it's possible now.
Yeah.
And you need to have a bit of a thick skin. You need to be stubborn. You need to stick with your guns. You need to have the data to back it up. I mean, you can't be out there, all hat and no cattle, right? I mean, you've got to have the data that will support your contentions, and to be that kind of steel backbone to say, yeah, I know this is going to work, and here's the data that shows that I'm right.
Yeah.
And you carry that forward. Right.
There are so many parts in there, Brendan, from even the like big idea. So T and I have both read this book, it's like Big Ideas, where when it comes to you, if you don't capture it and act on it, like, it's just going to go away. Like somebody else will, when you see somebody else later who you're like, that was my idea. Well, that's because you didn't act on it. So I love that you're like open to the big idea.
I like to say that lots of people have ideas. Okay. There's ideas are pretty easy to come by. Okay. In certain fields, people have ideas all the time. The hard part is knowing what's a good idea versus what's just, an interesting or attractive idea. And then investing the time and energy and the management and the leadership and the interpersonal skills and whatever else it's going to take to carry that forward. That's the hard part. That's the tricky part. And you can learn these things. You really, really can. People say, oh, I can't do that. I could never do that. Well, you'd be surprised.
Yeah. And I think you just showed that, like, where there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
So if you are willing to like have that belief that it can happen, and even where you're like, we just are going to try this. Like, we may not be able to go for the whole thing that we want, but what if we take one step forward?
Yes.
What is the one thing we can do? What can we try just to say, does it make a difference? Does it get us closer to what we're trying to do?
And don't be, I mean, we do this in science all the time. You don't be afraid of failure. Don't be shy about doing things. And then when it doesn't work, or the system burns out, or the thing blows up, or whatever, you say, okay, well, that didn't work. Don't just sit on your hands and mope and say, well, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? What was the point of failure? And what does that tell you about what you need to fix so that you will find success?
Right.
And maybe you fix it and you just go on to the next failure. Well, that's okay too, because each one of these things is a step down the road towards a system that's going to work, and it's going to be stable, and it's going to demonstrate that you are able to apply this as a waterless, non-thermal, chlorine-free, clean and green sanitizing process.
Yes.
That's the goal. I mean, there's a lot of sort of stumbling along the way to get there. And then once you get there, you can look back and say, hey, look what I did.
Yes.
Look how this is going to work for people.
Yeah. I love it that you understood the technology and exactly what you're talking about, the why of failure. Because even when someone said, oh, someone has tried that before and it failed. Well, you understand that a part of that failure is that technology hadn't evolved to where it is today, right? And even knowing that, and you even said it earlier, on like, how does the world need to shift in order to support, right, this idea, this innovation? Well, a part of that shift is we have to get better at technology, right? Like there has to be advancements, which we know we're already on the path of doing that, right? 20, 30 years ago, we knew we were on the path of doing that. But you saw it was there, and you were able to tell someone that was like, oh, they've done it, in the 50s. You're able to say, well, this is probably why it failed here. This is how we're doing things differently today that we're going to try out.
Right. Yeah. Don't let the failures of the past automatically close you off from trying something new and different now. Okay. Because that you can get into this kind of rhythm of a hidebound thinking. I mean, even for yourself, like even something that I did. Well, I tried that 10 years ago. It didn't work. Well, the world is a different place now than it was 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago. And the technology is different. The people are different. Access to information is different. Have things changed now so that what didn't work before might work now?
Yes.
It's always worth trying to keep a fresh perspective on things. That's
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what strikes me is along the way, so you had this idea out here that people said was Buck Rogers, right?
I
Like,
love that. I should get a tattoo. That's fantastic.
right? Like they didn't think. They were like, that's never gonna work. And
Right.
yet you inspired people, and you've talked about like together you had people who like we put these things together to get started. So I'm curious about how did like collaboration and teamwork and even creating this vision that people would like buy into to
Mhm.
help along the way. Like, what was that like? Because that sounds like it was a really critical part of advancing this whole cold plasma from the concept to where you are today to be able to work.
Oh, the teamwork and the collaborators that I had as part of this were, just, essential, right? I mean, the folks that I work with here, Joe Seitz and Allison McComb and Sarah Hertrick, and the other folks that I have here on this team are, Glenn Boyd, just critical, right? Because if it was just me, if I was there working in the lab by myself, that would have meant that anytime I came up on something that I didn't know, a technique that I didn't have, or a skill set that I didn't possess, or knowledge that I was lacking, then I would have to go to the library or go to the internet or coursework, or whatever, and I have to teach it all myself. And that's a slow process.
Right. Yeah.
It's so much better when you can find somebody who knows how to do this and is going to be better at that than you ever will, and
Yeah.
convince them to come part of the team, right? Now, to
Mm.
do that, you have to share the vision, and you have to say, look, I've got this idea of using electrical discharges as a way to kill pathogens on food. Okay. And those initial stages of lack of understanding or misunderstandings, you all have to go, you do have to kind of negotiate those things. But
Right.
once you are able to communicate that stuff effectively, you get people to work with you as collaborators on this. Oh, it just goes forward like crazy.
Yeah.
You're all working towards that same goal, and you really make a lot of really great stuff happen.
Yeah. And even as you're trying to get more resources, right? More, whether
Mhm.
it's more people or even finances, having other people on board to say, yeah, I believe in what he's doing. I believe in this. And this is why, from my own perspective,
Mhm.
right? That's just adding more people to say, okay, maybe we should put some funds towards it. Maybe we should put a little bit more spotlight
Right.
towards it because other people are also interested. Other
Yep.
people are also saying, this could work based on what I know about science.
Yeah, I remember there was one point after I've been working on this for a little bit and doing this. We were having a meeting with one of our folks from headquarters. One of the big bosses came up from headquarters for a project review, and he wanted to know what progress is being made. How are you doing? What is going on with this stuff? And he correctly wanted to know if the fairly limited money we didn't spend very much on this up to this point, but we were spending our time. He said, look, is this a good use of our time and our resources in the labs, right? And he said this is just proper due diligence on his part, and made for kind of an awkward question, or a hard question to me. He said, look, is this ever going to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
This really sounds pretty out there. Is this ever going to work? And I knew that I had about 15 minutes, right? That he was going to give me 15 minutes to convince him that this was going to be worth investing in. And if I failed to do the next 15 minutes, then it would be very hard to continue with
Right.
that, right? In the face of that kind of headwinds. Fortunately, we had the data, we had the equipment that we could show him. I could talk through this, and I could say, look, I know this looks really janky. I know it looks really, really, crazy, but this is the data that we're doing. This is the science that underlines these principles. This is how we're going to improve it. This is how we're going to make it better. And this is how this is going to lead forward as technology. And that was enough to convince him to say, yeah, okay, I got it. You got the green light. You can carry forward and do this, right? And
Yeah.
that's really, really important. And that kind of comes back to the science communication. It comes back to understanding what other people need, right?
Yeah.
You talked a little about some of the leadership skills and the science development and things that are part of this. Bringing people on board is like just the central part of it. And there's
Yeah.
different aspects to how you do that. There is that science communication, making sure people understand what you're doing and they see the value in it. They see that it's not just pie in the sky. It's not just the whole Buck Rogers, but they have some clear understanding of the technical stuff and also the application stuff.
Yeah.
You can share your enthusiasm, But enthusiasm alone by itself is not enough. There are a lot of very excitable, enthusiastic people, but who you wouldn't want to follow.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
But it has to be grounded in reality, has to be grounded in practicality. And then that's where you really, gather people together and move it forward. Right.
Yeah.
Part
Yeah.
of that too is, a little bit of strategic thinking.
Mhm.
I knew that. So this was somebody who was in charge of money. This is a program thing. And if I had spoken to a money person the same way that I talked to another scientist, it would have been very difficult. I mean, that's not the way to talk. You have to think about what is important to that person, right? What is important to your manager? What is important to somebody who could be a potential collaborator, somebody who is a potential investor? Think about what they need, what they want, and understand that, look, if you have value that you can offer to them, you need to make sure that they understand what that value is.
Right. Yeah.
Somebody who is a scientist, they're going to be interested in the cool science or the cool engineering. Somebody who is out, processing food and selling products, they want to be able to save money on the products and processes they're doing now, or they want to be able to make money on new products, new processes.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you need to understand how this is going to translate to something that's going to be valuable to them. And that's how you get people on board, right?
Yeah.
That's how you get people all to be part of that shared vision.
Yeah. This is fantastic, because that was really the next question, is like, what are those leadership skills that were crucial to you and your team through this process? And I mean, you named so many of them, from communication to even, influence on how you're communicating with other people, right? What influence method? We talk a lot about influence methods in boot camp. But there's different influencing methods based off of who that person is, what are their beliefs are, right? What excites them possibly about what you're doing? How does it benefit them? We always say, like, the why matters, right? Like, but many times as scientists, as technical people, we think the why is the science. Well, that is important. But like you said, some people, their why is going to be different. Yes. Right? Like, they have us from a science standpoint to understand the science. Okay, that's cool. It works. I believe you. You're a scientist. Mm-hmm. But why should I be a part of it?
Right. And it is so. I would say, if I could encourage any of my fellow scientists or subject matter experts to do that, if they're trying to do this, is to really take that step and just take off your scientist hat for a minute and try to think as an investor, or try to think as a processor or a regulator. What do they want to see out of this? What's valuable to them, right? And then that allows you to look at your own work in kind of a different perspective. And you can say, well, look, this is what's going to be valuable to you, and then you really kind of get people, other people interested and excited about it. As a subject matter expert in cold plasma, my guess is that I know more about cold plasma than many of the people that I speak with. Mm-hmm. But they know much, much more about product development or writing regulations than I could ever know, right? So everybody has their area of expertise, and it's where they overlap and where you have areas of mutual interest. That's where you can really come together and start to do some of these things, that whole change the world thing, right?
Yes.
And, if you can do that, if you can get that kind of shared enthusiasm and share stuff, then you can, really find yourself leading a parade, marching forward into the future. And if you don't do that very effectively, then you're just one guy walking down the middle of the street mumbling to himself. It's a whole different kind of view. People view you very differently if you're not able to make those connections and bring a crowd of people together to do this stuff. Right?
I love it. Sorry, that reminds me of this video that we share in one of our workshops, where they talk about movements, and they kind of show, like, they're at this music fest and some dude stands up and he starts dancing like all crazy, and until somebody joins him, he's just the dude out there on his
own. And everybody says, who the heck is that?
Right.
But as soon as other people start joining in, they're like, ooh, we see this.
Yes.
And how important, like you just talked about, right? If you're just out there on your own, like, you're just one person. But, like, as as you inspire others to come along with you, now you're making
And,
traction.
I always have to laugh because for a while I was that guy. I was that guy.
You're dancing.
I'm dancing down the middle of the street, and I caught a little bit of flack for it. But eventually, other people start to hear the music.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? We're like shared spirits on that, because sometimes when we talk about like coaching with leadership, people are like, well, why would we do that? And we're like, because it's about like total well-being and professional and personal development. Like,
Right.
we need to think bigger about taking care of people, not just the whole what's in it for me.
Yeah.
And that sometimes we feel like we're the ones dancing out there in the street.
Yeah,
As
and
people
it's
are like,
interesting that you
what
said
does that mean?
about coaching, because this kind of thing does come naturally to some people.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't come naturally to other people.
Yeah.
I mean, some people, if they're, if you could be a great scientist and be a great salesman too, right?
Right.
You'll have that in one body.
Yeah.
Other people don't. And if you have skills that you're lacking, then that's where the partnerships and the collaborations and things come together. So you can have these different skill sets that will carry the work forward. Because if you just have a great invention, a great innovation, it's terrific, but the only people who ever hear about it, it sits on a shelf in your lab, and it doesn't get out there and doesn't have any of those ripples or echoes in the world, then the impact of your work is pretty limited.
Yeah.
You really need to get out there and put it in the hands of people that are going to use it to reshape things and make the world a better place. That's what's really key.
Yeah. Brenda, I want to ask you about the time when you were the only person out there dancing, right? You were the only person in the street, and you kept going, right? And now you're here today and having more conversations about it, and people are on board, and you have financing. How was it in the beginning that kept you going? Like, what kept you moving forward and talking to people, even when you're like, man, I think they're tired of hearing me, right? But you persevered, right? You kept moving forward. What would you say kept you on that path?
Probably the biggest motivation, because I work in the field of food safety, right? And so in considering different kinds of foods that are contaminated with different human pathogens, these make people sick, right? I mean, there is actual suffering out in the world because of these human pathogens. And maybe it's like an upset stomach or a bad weekend where you can't be too far away from the bathroom, okay? But it can also be really, really bad, hospitalization bad. It can also be fatal, right? I mean, this is like what drives the whole thing here, and our whole mission in my team here with the USDA. What we're doing in our food safety arena is to say, well, how can we prevent that? How can we keep food safer? Now, there are some things where some solutions have already come up, and they need to be applied and they need to be rolled out. But there were foods for which there were not really very good solutions available. People were doing things, but this is a problem that is yet to be solved. And so anytime I was looking at this plasma, I thought, wow, this is great. This could be awesome. And because it doesn't need any sanitizing compounds, it just uses air and electricity, this could be rolled out like out in the field. You could do this on the tractors. You could do this out on a fishing boat. As you're picking the fish up, you could be treating these remotely. You all these various applications. Every time I started to get discouraged, I think, well, maybe they're right. Maybe this is just a pipe dream. Maybe I shouldn't do this. I would think about the need for new, effective processing technologies that would improve the safety of foods for foods where there wasn't already a good solution. And I just thought, this is something that really needs to be pushed further. I had never gotten to the point where I did a study and I did the stuff and I said, wow, they were right. It didn't work. This feels like a dead end. Never felt like it was at a dead end. I felt like very often I got to the limits of my own technical knowledge. Right. I got to the limits of my equipment quite often, right? But that meant that I just had to study harder, do more homework, build better equipment. And once you do that, then it, makes the food safer. And once you have some of those things, and you can see, like on the horizon, you can see that shining land where we don't have salmonella on sprouts, or we don't have, E. coli contaminating our almonds or something. That's a goal that's really worth working towards.
Yeah. I love that. I love that mindset, right? Like you stayed in that mindset of this is important and the impact is great. And we're not there yet, right? And I might not have everything figured out right now, but I can go find, I can learn, right? I can learn. That's what we talk about even with like leadership skills. Like just because you can't communicate effectively today, you can go and learn, right? You can go and get those skills to push towards being a better leader or a better, team member, insert, right? But you have to have that mindset of I want to be a part of this journey, right? And I believe in the future vision, the future mission.
And you have to keep reminding yourself, this is important. This is needed. The world will be diminished if we don't do this. That sounds a little grandiose, I'll admit. But every time I got to the point to say, should I stop working on this? Should I pull back? I said, no. There's so much that we can do with this, and it's important to push that forward.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I think the other part that you pull in that I think is so important is the self-awareness, like self-knowledge, self-awareness. Like that's the limit of my knowledge. That's the limit of what I can do. Or I could go further if I had this.
Yep.
And recognizing that the skill set or what you had available to you, like you could keep using it, but you probably wouldn't make the progress that you needed to have.
Mm-hmm.
So to just really process that and say, I want to get further, and my why is important enough that I'm going to look outside of what's in my circle to make progress.
Yeah. Now, sometimes that self-knowledge comes at 3:00 in the morning when you're lying there in bed staring at the ceiling thinking, what am I doing? What am I
whenever
doing?
It comes, be ready to receive.
But then the next day is a new day, and you get you roll up your sleeves, you get right back to it.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Amazing. That really is.
Uh-huh.
So as you think about the progress you've made, right, and even how the world has shifted since you started this journey, how do you see cold plasma technology evolving in the next few years? And how do you see it impacting even food safety regulations and standards globally?
Well, there's been such a huge burgeoning of cold plasma research, right? And when I first started doing this, I was part of a relatively small cohort of cold plasma mega nerds, right? I mean, there was just a few of us doing this, and I could count. I mean, I could literally count on my fingers the other people that were working in cold plasma. Now there's so many people that have done this all over the world, right? And they're working on areas that I would not have thought of, and they're developing technology in a lot of different ways. So some of the applications is treating cut cheeses and deli meats to eliminate listeria, right? In package stuff, treating fish fillets and other aquaculture products to eliminate surface contamination, treating grains to eliminate mold spores, so you eliminate aflatoxin from stored grains, developing plasma activated water and plasma activated mist. That's something I haven't,
Interesting.
Talked about a little bit technically. You take plasma and you push it into water, and then you can capture a lot of those reactive species. So what you're creating is an on-demand sanitizing solution that you can apply to, well, whatever you're currently applying sanitizing solutions to, right? Foods, food contact surfaces, tools, utensils, conveyor belts, whatever, right? But the only inputs there are air, water, and electricity. Very clean, very green, very, very effective. So using that as a technology, rolling that out is going to be really cool. There are a lot of places in the world where, because of supply chains or economics or whatever, getting a ready supply of sanitizing compounds, either chlorine-based or organic acid-based or quaternary ammonia-based, that might be problematic. But if you've got air, water, and electricity, then you can generate plasma, and you can generate plasma-activated water. And that really opens the door to having food safety standards and those kind of modern SOPs for food safety processing in a much broader applicable kind of way. There's a lot of opportunity rolling that out in different kinds of areas, right? A lot of really interesting opportunities going forward with that.
Wow.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Right. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, here's what I know. I didn't know. I still don't know, really anything about cold plasma. But today I've learned a lot. And I'm thinking, if I haven't already looked at cold plasma as a solution for something I'm working on, like if I was in manufacturing, still doing that right now, or even people I know, I'm going to be like, have you checked it out?
Oh, yeah.
People, go check that out.
Well, I'm giving a talk next week at the Society of Food Engineering meeting in Seattle. So if you're in Seattle next week, feel free to stop by.
Yeah.
Well, and once again, in the bigger picture, as we think about, cost or sustainability and impacts on products, like there's so many different aspects that all of, organizations and manufacturers and things that consumers are really interested in, that it feels like cold plasma has some solutions to help in that direction. So
yeah. I mean, as I've said this, like it used to be that, the big question about cold plasma is, does it work? And I think that question's been answered. I think it's been shown in lots of different ways it's a very effective antimicrobial. Then it became, well, will it work on my product? That's see where the kind of the specific applicability. Now we're at a really, really interesting place in the cold plasma R&D sphere, where it's, well, okay, so yeah, it works, and yeah, it'll work on my product, but can I roll this out and make money doing it? What's the economics of this? What's the cost standpoint? What's the throughput? That's where you really start to see this, kind of commercial rollout, pilot scale implementation. And I've already seen people doing these pilot scale tests now to address those and to generate that data and answer those questions, right?
Yeah.
As you roll this out, is it going to augment? Is it going to supplement? Is it going to replace some of your conventional food safety techniques and procedures, right?
Right. Yeah.
How is it going to go forward? How is it going to work? Lots of clear advantages with cold plasma, but there are some, issues. You could look at maybe the cost of the equipment isn't something you want to bear, even though it would replace some of these other things. That's the kind of give and take where you get into the real world. You have to answer some
right.
questions, right?
Yeah.
It's a very, very fascinating time in the sort of technology readiness phase for this for cold plasma.
Yeah, I feel like that's the last barrier, right? Of okay, it works on my product. Now, how can I make it affordable, or does it fit within my financials, right? Like I feel like that's the last, just like for your research, right? That last hurdle of resources, given resources, and then just the impact it's going to make on food, right? Like we see the recalls, every day, every week. And so the impact that this can have on the industry is huge.
One of the great things is that once it gets out into the real world and you put it in the hands of industry folks and commercial processors, then they will see ways to use it.
Oh, yes.
That me in my lab or any other scientist back in our lab, we never thought of. Right. I mean, that's where you start to see, again, the whole innovation circle, it all comes full circle.
Yes.
Now, this is a new tool that's in your hands. And I have some ideas about how you might want to use it, but now you've got it in your hands. You're going to be doing all kinds of things,
right?
And it's just like it's a whole flowering of different applications for this technology. And then in an iterative process, they might come back and say, well, this is great, but it would be really nice if we could get it to do X, or Y, or Z, and that then becomes a challenge to the scientists and the other R&D folks to say, well, I never thought about doing that, but yeah, let's take it to the lab or take it to the shop. We'll get to work with the wrenches and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
I keep like the side note of make sure it's validated, folks. Right. So often they're like, ooh, I can use it over here too. Like, that's cool. Let's do all the work we need to make
sure. Well, and I will say that's the other kind of aspect of where we are right now, is that now people are convinced, they understand that it's going to work. The data is out there and the data is convincing. They say, wow, great. Where can I buy one of these machines? There are people who are happy to sell you one of these machines, right? A cold plasma machine. But without understanding some of the technical stuff behind cold plasma, people might, companies or processors might buy a machine to test it out, not really understanding the technology that they're investing in. And they might get a machine that's too small, or it's the wrong kind of plasma, or it's not really appropriate for it. And then they try it and say, well, hey, yeah, this doesn't work. I've actually had this conversation where somebody came to me and said, hey, I bought a plasma machine, it didn't work. And I said, well, show me your plasma machine. And then I was able to walk them through the technical aspects of cold plasma and the chemistry behind it, and the physics behind it, and say, well, this is why it didn't work, because the system is set up in this way, electrodes shape,
Yes.
gas flow and whatever, right?
Yeah.
If the technology doesn't work, it didn't work on your product the way that you were applying it. Not
Right.
your fault, because this is very new, and it comes back to that whole nobody knows what this is.
Right.
But it's unfamiliar, and it does require, it is new and it's unfamiliar, and it does require some collaboration with, some subject matter experts to kind of, shepherd that along a little bit.
Right. Right. I keep thinking about how the world has changed to support, right, this innovation. And I mean, we talked about technology, right? But even just the world wanting to be more sustainable, more green, even just conversations around, chlorine sanitizers or the use of sanitizers and washes on product, like all of those conversations are bubbling right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, that's something that people weren't necessarily talking about in this way. Definitely not before the internet, right? Before we all got super connected through the internet and understand things see things that really a consumer might not have ever seen, because there was no video to be shared, right, across the world. So it's like even that change in the world and what consumers are interested in and how that's driving the way the industry is going and what they're investing in. I feel like even that had to change a little bit in order for cold plasma to kind of enter into the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were to look at the priority list for different processors or industry members years ago, and they said, well, what are your priorities? 30 years ago or 40 years ago, would sustainability have been on that list? Would carbon footprint have been on that list?
Right. No.
Water usage or water retention have been on that list. And maybe, it depends on where you're, certain parts of the world, that are where the electricity is more expensive or the water is scarcer. I mean, maybe it was what's on the radar of some people. But now I think most companies have that on their priority list somewhere, right? In addition to making a product, making sure that it's safe and attractive and affordable and so on, the sustainability aspects and the carbon footprint aspects and things, they're right, all part of this. And they're all looking to tweak and to reinvent their processes so that they can be more efficient, they can be more effective, they can have less of a footprint, less of a drawback, so that their food is safer, so that they're less susceptible to or open to potential problems or recalls, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants a recall, whether or not it ever reaches the consumer. Nobody wants a recall. That's all.
Right.
And so new food safety technologies are things that people are interested in and they are wanting to invest. And again, it comes back to, is this going to work on my product, and can I use it effectively in my throughput chain, in my system?
Right.
Right.
So interesting.
Wow.
It's an interesting topic. I feel like I can talk about cold plasma for hours.
With you, yes.
Right, with you.
I love it. You have such I love the stories. You bring such good energy to this and conversation.
Well, it's an interesting technology. I love the technology because it is so flexible. There's a lot of different kinds of equipment that you use to make the cold plasma. There's different forms of plasma that you can use. And so if this were a very narrow technology that only worked in one way on one commodity, it would still be cool. It would still be nice. Don't get me wrong. But because it has so much flexibility on so many things, from baked goods to almonds to chicken nuggets to sprouts and lettuce and tomatoes and fish fillets and grains, there's so many different ways you can apply this sort of stuff. There's so much work to be done. It's just a great time to be working in cold plasma, seeing that burgeoning of different areas of research.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you've done the work to be an expert at this point. So like you're knee deep in it, and I'm sure people are like, I need to talk to Brendan about this.
Here I am. As you could probably tell, I like to talk about this. I like to explain people, and anytime that I can help people to understand what cold plasma is and how it can work, that's a good day.
So that leads me to ask, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you if they do want to talk more and they have questions?
Probably the simplest way is just give me an email, and it's brendan.niemira@usda.gov.
Right.
So, and my name is right there. My name is right there on the screen. Point right there. So it's brendan.niemira@usda.gov.
Yes, and of course you're tagged on our LinkedIn with this show, so go there too and connect with Brendan if you have more questions and start those conversations.
Sure.
Yeah.
And if you do happen to find yourself at the Society for Food Engineering meeting in Seattle next week, stop by and say hi.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Wow. Well, our time goes so quickly, but it has been so fun having you on, Brendan. Thank you for being here.
Sure,
Yes.
this was fun. I really appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the time with you.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here and sharing and connecting it right for our audience on like those leadership skills, why it's important, even in the space of research.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think anybody can be a leader sort of at wherever you are. It's not just for the folks, it's not just for your manager or the people up in the C-suite or down in Washington, D.C. If you happen to work for the federal government like I do,
Right.
anybody can be a leader in their within their field.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And, and I think you just kind of played into, one of the things that we keep talking about is how we lead, right? Whether it's self-coaching, it's leading others in our space. We all have that ability. Sometimes we have to look outside of what we know to be able to do that better or differently.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so, of course, as we talk about linking this up, our boot camp September cohort starts in just a few weeks.
Yes.
And so we have people signing up, and we invite you to be innovative and try something new. If you're looking for how do I do things different, how do I get different results, give boot camp a try.
Yes.
We do things different so you get different results.
Exactly. It's all about innovation and how do I do things differently, right, to get different results instead of trying to use the same tools that we've been using and getting the same poor results when it comes to culture, right, when it comes to well-being, whole being of people.
Yeah.
This is important.
Absolutely. So if you are looking for boot camp, just head on out to our website. It's there. We also will drop a link in the show notes from today so that you can capture it there.
Yes.
But once again, we are so grateful that not only did our audience join us, but Brendan having you here too. So much fun.
Sure.
So,
thanks so much, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see everyone next week. Same time, Wednesdays at noon Eastern time, 11 Central. Join us each week. We have wonderful guests. Sometimes it's just us talking about leadership in food and how it connects to the work that we do. So we hope to see you next week.
Yep. Make it a great week.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.